That's right. Yeah, I wrote a piece for the West Midlands Forum, which is a new, I think you can call it a think tank. It's a new think tank, sort of backed by Liam Byrne, MP, and also kind of co-chaired by lots of quite well-known Labour figures and councillors, including Ian Ward. So yeah, it was really great to be able to contribute to that, and talk, I guess, quite broadly about people-friendly streets, which is what we need to achieve in the West Midlands. And actually, just really pleased that the reception that it got, because we had various different talks on the launch of that event, and a couple of people called out the fact that they read the article and thought it was really interesting, and I think that's one of the important things, and one of the watching Push Bikes' own journey, watching kind of making it more than just cycling, really.
Yeah.
And a whole transformation of our streets and the kind of communities that we live in. So yeah, I really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, so it was really good to see that, and I think lots of people will have really enjoyed over the last 2 years seeing the way that your work in Coventry helped raise the profile of active travel issues, obviously alongside lots of other activists, but it's really great to see the work you did. And one of the questions we had sort of picked up on that, and picked up on what you've said about your vision. We have two questions which I think are quite closely related. One of those is, what do you see as the most significant barriers to making the West Midlands more active travel friendly? So between us and those people friendly places. And the other was, what improvements would you like to see to cycling and walking provision by the end of your term? And can any of your success in Coventry be replicated more widely across the West Midlands? So what are the barriers, and where are we trying to get to?
Yeah, so I think the barriers are to the kind of change that we need is actually just the scale of it. So I've not yet heard anybody that I've worked with over the last 3.5 months doing this job that doesn't think that this is absolutely what we should be doing. Absolutely need a huge increase in cycling, a huge increase in walking. And we need to massively decarbonize transport, including, reducing the amount of private car miles that we have. So, it's written down in the new, local transport plan being produced. But in this is not a new thing. Before that, it's been in lots of transport plans. I think that the thing for my difference in being kind of purely I guess a campaigner, because being a campaigner is really hard, but I've done it, and I know the amount of effort that everyone puts in. But it is easier to say, oh, it should be like this. It should be like this, and I think the scale of the challenge is both what really excites me, but also what I think is one of the biggest barriers. Because if you look at, I guess before I started doing this job, I thought that at the start of the pandemic, I thought, maybe naively that was the moment for wholesale change, and it didn't quite pan out that way. And then you look at what we're looking at now, and I'm working on kind of like funding plans for the next 5 years, typically. And I guess the biggest realization is this is going to be a system change takes time, right? So in the same way it took us nearly 80 years to get into this mess, it might take us, I think we don't have loads of time. I think we need to crack on. But, we need to get a move on, and we have to find ways that allow us to make people-friendly streets en masse without, because there is not enough funding available. There will never be enough funding available to have the kind of high quality segregated protected bike lanes that you've seen like on the Blue Route or in Camden and Coventry on every single road or every single arterial road. So that then comes into the biggest change that I think we can make and that I can make in this 3 years is to provide the landscape, the groundwork, the funding, and the securing the funding for the region to allow us to start to build considerable parts of of the network, and that means building the big stuff, but also getting the small stuff right. So I think we learned lots. I've not been involved in the process, but I learned lots observing about low traffic neighborhoods, for example, which allow us to allow people to provide kilometers, tens of kilometers of safer cycling routes for people at a fraction of the cost of high quality protected routes, which typically cost £1.5 million per kilometer, as an example. Whereas you can install a low traffic neighborhood for between 250 and 400,000 pounds, so it can give you a lot more scale. So we need to build we learn a lot, because some of those
so there's a problem with scale. There's a problem with kind of communicating what it takes to achieve change of the ambition that we want. One of the questions I had, I should say, by the way, that the earlier questions were from John Munro and Paul Gaynor, so thank you for them for giving me those questions. Another question, this time from Laura Creven in Sturgeley, was about the way that your new role, when you describe your role, you mentioned working with councils to agree a coordinated approach to cycling and walking infrastructure. I'm guessing that when you talk about the scale of the problem and what it takes to get there, that's got to be at least one of the key barriers for you, managing to get different councils working together, and perhaps councils and the West Midlands Authority working together. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. I think the will is very much there. It does differ from borough to borough, region to region, however which way we look at it, and we are quite a disparate region in the way the West Midlands Combined Authority is structured. But I've not met anybody who doesn't want to do this, and who's not enthused by me coming on board and wanting to kind of get with the program, if you like. And so really the concerns and the issues come down to pure practicalities of that coordination, and a lot of it's down to. Can
I mention one of those practicalities? Sorry to talk over you there, Adam. And it's actually from Laura's question again, because she says, look, it sounds like a fantastic ambition, it's sorely needed, and I'm sure she'd take on board what you say about the fact there's good intentions there, but there's also perhaps a tendency to find siloed working, and the example she gives, which I happen to be able to see Ruth Cumming here on the screen, I think she'd also agree with, is cycle storage, and the fact that you've got a council like Birmingham with hugely ambitious and brilliant aspirations for cycling, and yet they've not been able to, the planning department hasn't been able to approve what seems like a straightforward request for cycle storage outside the front. Now, there'll be reasons for that. There are reasons for that legally, but it feels as though there's a piece of coordination that's needed. Do you have any comment on the coordination, not on the specific?
Yeah, I think the coordination, it is important, and the coordination is important, but planning, I don't want to get down like a planning.
No, I'm conscious of that.
Not even on the specifics, but just generally, the planning system, I think most people agree, is like pretty broken. So, and I'm not going to be able to fix the planning system. So, I can try and help influence, but I think if we look at also again, talking about that system change and the amount of time that it takes that, at the moment, if you want to install a cycle shed, quite justifiably, you have to play by the rules that were created decades ago. And in the particular history of some of the model villages in Birmingham and how they were created, and therefore it's quite specific and quite uniquely kind of annoying in today's modern age, where we need to move so quickly to decarbonize, and the system hasn't caught up. Now, I can say I agree, and I can say I certainly agree, as a guy that before doing this job created his own parklet in a van because of the system being,
that was a brilliant thing. I'm sure others will agree.
Being not the system being an arse. I think that's I totally sympathise with it. But I got to be, and I think this is really important point. I have to be really focused in where I'm going to make impact and change, and using the tools and the levers which aren't inconsiderable that are available to me to make the best change I can. And for example, the planning system is not one of those levers. But what I can do, for example, is get it right for future. So the West Midlands Combined Authority spend have capital budgets, and they invest in housing. Yeah. They invest in housing projects, and the conversation I'm having right now is being able to say, well, if we're giving this housing development, 5 million quid to get to do a considerable part, so that we can get that right, we should be totally ensuring that there's a certain amount of cycle provision, that there's a certain amount, they're designed with low traffic neighborhood values, for example, and these things that we can influence using our softer influence. And the as we have with capital funding, that is ultimately where I can make a difference. And I can only share the frustration of the planning thing, and knowing that Wasim Zafar did try, and we talked about it, and I took it up, but there's only so much I can do, and the councillors will agree that there's only so much they can do with the current system as well.
Thank you. I should say, by the way, and I should be really careful about this, because otherwise I will get told off by a colleague when I go into the office tomorrow. First of all, as a kind of declaration of interest, just a full disclosure, Ruth appealed against that particular decision that I think most of us know about, and my firm's been able to offer some pro bono time. So it's a partner of mine and a colleague who's been working on that. But secondly, the thing I'd get told off about is that my colleague would say very clearly that actually the problem is not the planning system in itself, but the time and resource. And I know that local authorities struggle and planning departments struggle with time and resource. The time and resource to read the planning policies properly and apply them in a way that is consistent, and that takes the time to appreciate that although cycle storage, for example, is different from cars and therefore less common, that actually there's good provision for that even going back 10 or 20 years. And that you can sometimes say yes, and we'd say in this case you can say yes, consistently with existing guidance and existing policy.
I agree. I think I know that you want to get through those questions, but can we just pick up on siloed working just a little bit, because I think it's a really important point that Laura makes, and it's in many ways I think valid, and on a couple of levels. So one level being the fact that the way the government funds active travel and other transport things is by definition siloed, and that creates competition. So simultaneously, and this is not, I'm not talking out of turn here, this is stuff I've said to the government, is that they will launch Bus Back Better, for example, and promote for heavy bus priority measures, which are great and I totally support. At the same time, they'll promote active travel funding, talking about priority over side roads, road-based reallocation. Not that the two aren't incompatible, but the approach with the siloed system that there is and the siloed levels of funding is typically you then got a position where active travel and bus are inadvertently sort of competing and fighting for space, whereas the real elephant in the room is the single occupancy private vehicles that nobody's talking about, but there's much less focus, because the focus is pegged to the funding. So that's where people put their time and resource to try and win that funding on behalf of their local authority or the region, which is admirable. So I think that's changing, because we're having you might have heard of CRSTS, the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, and that combines bus and active travel funding, and has meant that all local authorities have had to really work together with TfWM as well.
And there's quite a big sum at stake there, I think.
Yeah, it's benched for £1 billion over the next 5 years, so really considerable. And we're still still going back and forth with government on different things. That's
Mhm.
not a secret, but you know, I think coming out of this, a significant portion of that is active travel. So if we get what we want,
Yeah.
combined with the active travel funds, you know, we could quite plausibly have a couple of 100 million at our disposal for active travel over the next 5 years. And also, even the projects that aren't active travel have to have active travel built in. So
just to be clear, that's a couple of 100 million in the West Midlands for active travel.
in the West Midlands.
Potentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Potentially. And you know, a strong potential. And then even the schemes that aren't active travel schemes have to have active travel built in. So just on the kind of, you know, everyone working in their own sort of lane, I think that is changing as we develop as a region. And also the government has been quite public about this, is that, you know, if local authorities and combined authorities don't get with the programme, then they risk losing funding for other forms of transport that they might really want funding for, even if they, you know, like roads or trams and things like that. So I think what that means is bringing it a lot more together, which is really great to see. But it's totally gone. I was just saying, it's totally there. It's totally there, and I agree. And I'm just being honest, I've been dealing with it for the first 3 months with trying to unpick the metro as one example.
Please tell us about the metro, because that's one that people ask about.
Yeah.
So is there anything you can tell us about the lessons learned from the metro?
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned. I'm still getting to the bottom of it, but we will get to the bottom of it, and we will get it right. And the mayor's totally committed on this. But ultimately, it's that siloed working. Again, you know, building a tram. Some of the time scales of this are very tough. So you know, the original order with the Department of Transport to build the tram is something over 10 years. And 10 years ago, we weren't thinking about active travel in the same way that we were thinking about it right now. So things do change. That was for Broad Street, for example. But ultimately, you've got tram engineers in a room full of other tram engineers talking about how they're going to build the tram. And that's really what it comes down to. Now, that shouldn't happen again in the future, because I'll be in the room, you know, there to say, well, we're not thinking, you know, in an interconnected way here.
Did I get you right? You think that the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, the CRS-TS, I think they call it, is an opportunity to get past that siloed working, because it ties some things together. I asked partly because we've had questions on this. For example, George Riches in Coventry says, is concerned that perhaps transport officials tend to ignore transport modes that have less than 5% share, and concerned to know how we can change that. Like, you may disagree with the premise, but I suppose there's an underlying concern that cyclists and walkers come last when it comes to thinking about transport, and the big shiny vehicles are higher up the queue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm new to this, but my observations are quite, you know, fresh and unfiltered as well. I've not been, you know, had it beaten out of me yet. You know, I'm very much kind of looking at this fresh, and I think in many cases, from a policy point of view, that's totally wrong. Like that's not what happens. Any conversation that I've had goes. You know, we're talking really about, and public transport. You know, I must say, having been a campaigner trying to promote, you know, cycling, for example, public transport really gets, you know, has such precedent in this region. You know, it's really taken seriously, and everyone wants to make it much better, and you know, that's really important. But from a policy point of view, we're totally talking about what we need to be doing. I'll tell you what is ignored: walking.
So I was going to pick up on that, because Laura particularly has said, and I'm sure others would agree, that it never really seems to get mentioned much. So please. Yeah.
So if anyone's really bored, if you search the Department for Transport's organisation chart, I told you it was boring. And if you look for the Deputy Director of Active Travel, who's a great guy called Rupert, I work with him really closely. He doesn't even get a profile picture in the organisation chart. You know, there's shipping, there's aviation, roads, maritime, everything like that.
But
He gets
Rupert doesn't get a profile pick.
No, and like I'm saying, I mean, Chris Bourne were talking about this. I'm saying that's like 35 to 40% of journeys, and he hasn't even got a profile picture. So I'd say that, you know, from the way that it has been historically, I'd say that is right. And yes, you know, we only have to look at the way our roads are designed to know that they're just designed to get traffic through, cut rotor traffic through as quickly as possible. And that's the bit that we need to unpick. So I'd say we're in a good place now, because you can't build road schemes. You know, Highways England can, but from a local authority point of view, looking at the CRSTS settlement and looking at everything the government's asking, current government's asking us, if you say, I want to build a big dual carriageway and can you give me some government funding to do it, they'll just say no. They'll say no, we want to focus on bus and we want to focus on active travel. Send us something that's to do with that, please. And some local authorities, not us, have, you know, I've been told from officials, have put together bids for dual carriageways, you know, the best LTN 120 compliant infrastructure you can imagine, that goes from nowhere to nowhere, that meets up to a mass industrial unit and retail park, so they can, you know, use active travel money to get funded to build more roads. And it's just getting laughed out. It's just going, which is really positive, because that's, you know, we've got to get real with what we need to achieve.
And flitting around a little bit, but I've got an eye to the clock. One of the questions we've got picks up on kind of road danger reduction, and the question, which doesn't seem to come from someone named here, is Action Vision Zero calls for the monitoring of the perception of the safety of cycling, and with responses analysed by gender. But perhaps we need other key performance indicators besides KSIs, killed and seriously injured. And do you support that? And are you aware of anywhere where it's happening? And I'd widen that slightly, which is just to understand the interaction between your role and the kind of crime and policing piece and the road danger piece. Can you say anything about that? It's a big, slightly amorphous question. Yeah,
so I think the good news is that from what was just said there, our next, what would be known here as the Sustrans Bike Life Report, but it's now going to be known as, I think, the City Index or the Walking and Cycling Index or something like that. It escapes me. Does use that nationally or regionally representative survey sample to talk about safety, and it's split by gender and various different other demographics. So that's, you know, that's there, and that's consistent, that we're kind of, you know, being you know, we're monitoring. In terms of my interaction with the police, we work quite closely, actually. So, you know, I've already had a meeting with the Police and Crime Commissioner and talked about, you know, actually talking quite specifically about third-party reporting, which I think could be, if given a little bit more funding, could really have massive dividends for road safety, just from the concept of believing that you could be caught doing something, you know, by doing close pass, and just how efficient it is as a system, and talking more generally about road safety. But yeah, there are various different subcommittees on the Combined Authority that talk about sustainable and safe travel. Safe travel at the moment is perceived as being safe on public transport, etc. But, you know, I'm working to kind of you know, educate. But the biggest message that I have is people won't do this unless it feels safe, even if it is, you know, statistically, you know, there are way more dangerous things that we do every day than ride bikes. But if people don't feel safe, they won't do it, and that's something that's getting really understood now. We need to make it safe. We need to make it feel safe, even from people who don't, you know, aren't well read on this topic. They're getting that, and they know that that's the key point.
That's really good to hear. I mean, there'll be lots of people on this call who have that mixed feeling about talking about those occasions when people do get killed or seriously injured on the roads. And over the last few days, we've had the situation at the Plane in Oxford and at Hope and Gyratory in London, where in each case women have been killed cycling, just getting to work. And there'll be lots of people who want both to highlight that, shout out in a bit of anger at what Tom Flood calls results, not accidents, and the fact that something needs to be done in each of those occasions. There's been at least a decade of saying you could do something here without it happening. And at the same time, exactly what you point out, that statistically we all find ourselves in conversations. I had it this afternoon with a colleague who's worried about her son cycling in London, where you say, well, I know why you're worried, but statistically he's doing himself good. He might have that extra 10 years of disease-free life. So it's a difficult one, but I think we all know that we want you to be thinking about that, and it's reassuring to hear that others already are across the system. Again, flitting around slightly, we've got a couple of questions about secure covered bike parking, not at home, but out and about, and what people can do to encourage that, with the sense that, you know, obviously you need that secure parking at either end. There are some policy documents of the council that talk about car journeys beginning and ending with parking, and it's not really that different with a bike, even for those of us with a Brompton. Oh, you're mute again, David.
What's happened? Hang on.
Lost Adam again.
Oh, hang on. Ask to unmute. Sorry. Is that working?
Almost there. It looks like it's still muted. I'm seeing the mute sign. The rest of you should be
I'm
worried
asking
because
Adam
we'll have
to
to ask you the
Yeah,
questions.
good. I'm unmuted.
I'm sorry. Don't know
Sorry,
what happened.
I'm in the habit of muting when I'm not talking because my kids are screaming outside, so they don't want to go to bed. Sorry, just a habit. Covered bike parking. I think we do elements of bike parking really well, and I know people will laugh when I say that, but there's just so much money floating around for like cycle rail parking, for example, and you know, not a minute goes by in this job without sort of someone saying, oh, we should do more train stations. And I do agree, but you know, we're in a pretty okay position there in terms of security and covered stuff. The big missing thing for me, and also, you know, we've got this fund going at the moment on high streets and you know, Sheffield stands and stuff like that. The big missing link for me is the residential cycle hangers, and that's something I'm committed to getting brought forward in the West Midlands. I've seen it work elsewhere. Not rocket science. It involves not insurmountable, but not insignificant paperwork to go with it. So we have to be, you know, I'm trying to build that resource that could support officers at local authorities to make it as easy as possible, for example. But we've got to totally provide people who live in, you know, maisonettes or live in flats or terraced houses, which there are many in the West Midlands, you know, that we've got to give them the option. Because I met a guy I was just talking to at the train station who said my bike was nice and said he had a bike. He used to work in a factory, lived in a third floor flat, got stolen twice, stopped cycling, and then he got a car, drove to work, and then he eventually became an Uber driver. That's like, now his job is just driving everywhere. You know, I think that story could resonate with so many people who've experienced that. So we need to do much better. So I'm looking at trying to get funding in imminently for that, and then working with local authorities to help prioritise, because it does involve their support in stuff like the traffic regulation orders and things like that. But it's all stuff that, from what I've heard so far, everyone's keen on doing, just bringing funding into the region to do it. And then I can have then there'll be another problem where there'll be waiting lists and we won't have enough. You know, it's the problem that London has right now, but it would be a better problem to have than this point where it's quite embarrassing to say we've got 0 on street.
So let me follow that up with a couple of quick questions about who has responsibility for what. We've had questions about you know, where your remit begins and ends. One question was, I think from Scott Cooper, cycle infrastructure is primarily built on local highway authority roads. You're employed by West Midlands Authority. Do you have a remit there? And for example, should schemes be linked to wider infrastructure projects such as railways? So a scheme along Cartland Road, for example, here in South Birmingham, that would link to the new station being promoted at Hazelwell, the Hazelwell station. I don't know how familiar you are with
I know. I know. The Campbell line.
Yeah. So the idea is, you know, is there some work to do to do more with the opportunities to create opportunities for active travel alongside those? Yeah.
So I've got to really push the genuine partnership working, because we do work as a combined authority. You know, all the local authorities in this region are constituent members of the combined authority. You know, cabinet members, their leaders often sit as portfolio holders in our in the combined authority. We work, not an hour goes by without working with the local authority in this job. So although yes, my job is with the WMCA, I'm working really closely with local authority, both from the political and from the officer side, to make sure that we get what we needed delivering. And as I say before, no one said it's a bad idea yet. They want to do it. They just, we just need to be targeted with where we provide extra resource to help them do it more quickly, because ultimately it's not the will that's been the problem. Thus far, it's been capacity and resource. We need to scale that up massively. Integration is really important, and again, that's something I can have I've inferred that I'm looking really close at how the metro integrates with active travel, for example. And we should be doing exactly the same in the same way. When we're talking about housing, if we're funding train stations, we need to be looking at how that integrates. And I may struggle for stuff that's already in the ground, like university station, for example. But with projects that we're looking at, I've been looking at Sprint, for example, the rapid bus system, and straight away I've already kind of made sure that our cycle parking, that none of those bus stops had cycle parking provision, and we want people to be using kind of connected transport. So straight away that's being changed and shifted and updated, and we've got and now we're starting to build actual. We've secured funding of just in the Black Country, for example, about £3 million to be able to build connections to the other projects like the tram, like public transport, like new rail and things like that. So we are totally thinking about it.
And are there opportunities to talk over you. Are there opportunities to put pressure on housing developers to provide, for example, cycle parking? We've got a question from Shane Fitzpatrick to that.
Well, I think it goes back to what I said before, in that I'll certainly be putting pressure on any project that we have a say in. And the part of it is down to the planning system. Part of it is down to there's been the planning white paper, hasn't there? There's been the levelling up white paper. All this stuff links in with each other, so I can expect change. But I did see Michael Gove, retweeting something from Create Streets the other day, saying, that basically we're building in car dependency, and he's sharing that. I think they know, and I think whether they'll get to being able to do, but I think we need to improve that massively. But I will be putting pressure on every lever that we have, and the lever is usually funding. But that's the way the world goes round. So it's not it's a fairly considerable lever to make sure we're doing the right thing for active travel, and we're not ignoring it.
Okay, that's really good to hear. So we're obviously in a virtual room full of campaigners. What can we as active travel advocates, campaigners, do to support your work? There are lots of people here who'd like to be able to put pressure on. Should they be lobbying their local councillors? Is there something else that they could do better?
Yes, I think my learnings from Coventry was kind of like, being the vice mayor was sort of like an apprenticeship, if you like, of this. And I learned quite quickly that it was about relationships. And that's what I'm sort of, the approach that I'm taking here. It's about the relationships we have with councillors, with officers. As Chris Boardman said more eloquently than me, politicians generally have 100 fires to put out, and they're gonna go to the 10 that are going to burn them first, ultimately. So unfortunately, what that means is often what we get is this kind of post-bag politics, and all being councillor is really sort of I wouldn't say thankless, but it's a really tough gig, and I'm really thankful of anybody that does it, regardless of what party they are, because I won't go on a tangent, but I think the system's sort of almost broken there as well, because most people don't get paid very much to be a councillor. If they're doing it full time as a cabinet member, they don't get paid very much, and the amount of power that these people and the decisions that these people have to make about our future, I think we should be, paying them properly, actually, for what it's worth. But I think that the biggest thing I learned in Coventry was to say thank you and to say, great, what next? I started off with a bit sort of like, this is rubbish, everything's rubbish, or whatever. And then, the reaction to that is, I'll just put it in my inbox with all the other stuff that people hate me about. What I was able to kind of do in Coventry is build this like, buoyancy of like, I want to do more of that. That was great. I felt brilliant. I'm making a difference, because no one goes into politics not wanting to make a difference. That's why people do it. So I think saying thank you and trying to focus on where, even if it's not perfect, focusing on where like things have been done and progress has been made, rather than always being critical. And that's really important when it comes to post-bag politics, because things like low traffic neighbourhoods or cycle lanes, one of the things we did in Coventry with other advocates, which someone whom are on the call, is there was a petition against the Camden cycleway, and we knew that didn't quite sound right, because everyone I spoke to really loved the ideas, and most people would quite want their kids to go up to cycle to school. So we set up a counter petition, if you like, just making it clear, and that got double the amount of signatures that the anti petition one and without kind of doing tit for tat stuff, it's a lot easier for politicians when they get it in the the inbox. If they also got a lot of positive messages and people say this is great, do more, then they're going to be a lot more considered in their response.
So let me ask you, Adam, two questions that pick up that piece about the good and the bad both being highlighted to politicians, but trying to be positive. Esther Boyd's raised in the chat a question about that positivity, and that's because there was that great, we're seeing much more with Birmingham Mail. I get the sense you've had a few conversations there, and we've recently had a tweet go out saying, can you tell us about the worst roads to travel on? And immediately there was a flurry of the sort of tweets that you might expect, saying it's dreadful and the A38 doesn't work at the Harry's Place junction or whatever it might be. What Esther asked, and I think it's a really good question, is why, how are we going to get people excited about swapping from their cars to cycling, considering active travel, if all we're all doing is highlighting the worst of our existing infrastructure? What should we be doing to really highlight the good stuff out there?
Yeah, I think the Birmingham Mail, I've had a couple of meetings with the editor there, and I know him from Coventry, and he's super enthusiastic about supporting this and
this is Graham
supporting this agenda. Yeah, Graham, and we've actually got a pipeline of articles of stuff that we're going to work together on.
Fantastic.
Trying to we have to be pragmatic, and I think, like we were talking about just now with the awful death in Oxford and in London, you have to strike that balance of inspiring people that this is a real positive change that brings back many societal and personal benefits, but not losing sight of the reason there's only like a few people doing it is that it feels unsafe and can be dangerous at times. So we have to be sensible. I'm quite keen, not to fall into the trap of what local authorities have done before, which is just sort of promote cycling and say, it's great, looks brilliant. Wouldn't you love to do it? Because we don't want to be. I'm sure
that there are people around this call who are fed up with seeing the word encourage associated with cycling.
Exactly. And we don't want to be the mayor in Jaws who's saying, hey, come and do this brilliant thing. Come swimming in our water. It's lovely. We need to be realistic with people, and I think a lot of people understand, because when they're polled they say, I don't cycle because. However, we need to make it a balance, and I think the problem with the Birmingham Mail before, and I said this to them, is that there was no balance, right? So I think now they're looking at how they can be more balanced. So this story is actually trying to get on like an insight into people cycling, but and what's it like for them, and building that empathy. But I'm also doing, I'm doing a couple of pieces with them soon. One is I'm taking one of their reporters out, on to kind of do her commute by bike when she's never done it before, and like I'm doing a piece on here are the places you can walk quicker than you can drive in Birmingham, kind of things like that.
Yeah.
So trying to be positive as well. So it's got to be a mixture. But I am hopeful that we'll have a kind of different outlook in the kind of media coverage for active travel, because they're really supportive of this agenda at the senior management level. So here's hoping. And
I suppose just very quickly, in a personal note, I think I'd really like to see, I noticed, I think the Oxford Mail highlighting some of the tragedies in Oxford.
Yes.
And using that as an opportunity to call for change. I'd like to think we can get the Birmingham Mail there too. But moving on, going back actually to the question of how we engage positively to encourage change. Amy Aaron Thomas has raised the question of whether a little bit of healthy competition might be a useful spur, and something like the healthy streets. Scorecard. The scorecard.
Healthy
exactly.
Street scorecard. Yeah,
that's the one. So could we do something like that, or would that, do you think, be a negative approach to the different authorities we've got?
I'm gonna reserve judgment on that. I'm gonna take it away. I've met the lady who set up a Healthy Street scorecard, and I've seen it, work in London. I'm really quite interested about it, because it doesn't again, it doesn't make it just about cycling or just about walking. It's about how a street feels, feels to you. So it can create that real objectivity about when you're looking to improve. So I'm going to take that away and look at it and see how it could apply here. In terms of generally competition, that's totally a key part of this region, which is why I think it's a great region as well. We've got cities like Birmingham and who are obviously really bold and ambitious in what they're aiming to achieve, and I think that lifts the level of our other cities up as well. And I know that there are cities that are proportionately quite a lot smaller, for example, like Coventry, which I always champion because it's where I'm from. But Coventry is currently outperforming Birmingham on the cycle hires, for example. And I know that creates quite a lot of discussion and worry, because and Coventry are very pleased with that, of course, because they don't want to be overshadowed and whatever. In the Black Country, I think it's really important as well, just being frank. The Black Country has a variety of varied political will. I think they're all in an okay place, but some are more stronger than others. And I think you want to work at the pace of the most ambitious, really. So working with someone who really wants to do this, and then the Black Country, who often club together on bids, thinking, well, if we don't get with the program, we're not going to get the funding. That works. It just works, and that's what the premise of Active Travel England is set up on. That it works, and so we're definitely using that in a nice, in a really in a nice and collegiate way.
Brilliant. I mean, that's really good to hear. So just picking up again on what we as active travel advocates can do. There's a really interesting question in the chat again, this time from Neil Webster, who may have sadly left by the time I asked this now, about engaging with business. And it's very nice to see that he mentions the success in London of Cycling Works. Sadly, the Birmingham bit of Cycling Works was set up by a rather lazy lawyer who hasn't done nearly enough over the pandemic to push it forward, but we'll spare his blushes and not name him. That's me, just for anyone who doesn't know. But what can we do about engaging with businesses, and is that a place that you think people should be focusing their energy?
Yes, I think that is a big lever, and I'm a massive fan of the work done by Cycling Works in London. So I think it's a great opportunity. Often, what I hear a lot is about the economic case made by everything we do has to have a benefit cost ratio, all of these things, and we want to get inward investment to the region. So It's actually been really, really powerful having, you'll remember maybe a year or two ago, HSBC, moving their headquarters and actually saying, unless you've got a blue badge, we've not got a parking space here for you, but we've got bikes, we've got other things like that, we've got a metro station outside, all of these kind of things. So they're I think that's really bold, because so much of the argument is, oh, if we do it, the whole economy will collapse, and so often that is just totally not the case. If you promote active travel, people won't turn up to our high streets anymore, or businesses will leave the area, and that's that is just largely nonsense. So I think having that support, everyone has either has a job, is an employer, has had a job, knows someone who's got a job, etc., has a level of influence there that I think if you can again get it on the record, say that support, that can be really powerful. Where we're doing in the Binley cycleway at the moment in East Coventry, major employment sites there, Binley Business Park, who are supportive, and the local NHS hospital really supportive as well, and that makes a really big difference to the narrative.
Brilliant. And you mentioned the NHS. Are you having conversations with some of the health authorities here?
I will, but not yet. Not in the first instance. There's loads and loads of stakeholders and lots of conversations to have.
I'm sure.
But that's totally, totally part of it. And I think it's been well documented that the NHS needs active travel, both from a having enough money to exist point of view, because of all the health costs we have of things like type 2 diabetes and things like that, but also also because it's the right thing to do, and the University of Coventry Hospital, Coventry and Warwickshire is a one of the other campaigns in Coventry put it is a car park with a hospital attached to it. It needs to we need to redress the balance, and when we start talking about free parking for things like that, we end up forgetting about people who get public transport, or what we're doing for active travel there. So
okay, so I'm conscious of the time. We've got about a little bit more than 5 minutes to go. What's the most exciting thing that's going to be happening, do you think? What's coming over the horizon over the next 12 months or so for cycling and for active travel, and remembering Laura for walking?
Yes, I think the most exciting thing is going to be, and this most exciting thing is not going to sound exciting to anybody, but it is really important. It's long-term funding settlements. So we get year-to-year settlements for active travel. So a lot of our staff can't even be hired past 1-year contracts and things like that because of the funding goes. And we also don't have a pipeline of schemes, because by the time you develop one, you deliver it, funding's run out, you bid for the next funding, you do a little dance with the government, they give you the funding, you build the next scheme, nothing ever gets put in the bottom drawer. So we're, let's talk about this 5-year settlement. Also, the next active travel settlement should be 3 years or so. So that will allow us to actually go, and that's what I talk about, one, just building routes here and there, actually looking at entire areas and going, what's the network plan here, and how are we going to deliver it over several years? And I think that's going to make a difference and make it much less of a postcode lottery, or just luck whether you've got somewhere you can cycle or not, and actually looking at the whole needs of entire swathes of the region. We have to get into that long-term settlement.
Brilliant. Okay, and we're going to be holding, we hope, meetings like this now and again. I'm looking now at a stream of questions coming in through the chat. You've been enormously helpful with questions so far, and we got a flurry of questions before today. We'd like to be able to invite you back.
Of course. No, totally. I am happy to. very much so. Yeah, I think I've got lots to do. I want to deliver. I don't want to be a talker. So I'd rather meet slightly less frequently and come to you with updates than sort of, hey, here's my vision each time. So I'm very keen on delivery. But yes,
so we might be able to leave you in peace for 2 or 3 months, and then I suspect there are lots of people here keeping the receipts who will be wanting to ask you how you've got on. And similarly, you've talked about things we can do, and I think we'd be keen to hear from you about things that we could be doing, and perhaps from time to time things that we don't seem to be doing. That'd be great. I just did have one final question for you, which is I couldn't help noticing on Twitter that I think it was Sustrans West Midlands, following a tweet by a local campaigner, and I think now Sustrans staffer Kat Watton had invited you to come down to Birmingham and try out bike polo. So are you planning to?
All right. Yeah, fine. Yeah, I love that.
I think when we spoke earlier, you mentioned you might be up for most things on the bike. So I'm going to throw that out to the audience here and suggest that next time we meet Adam, we might give him some other suggestions.
I would like the idea of bike polo, but I've never managed to give it a go. So yeah, why not? And I've never ridden a penny farthing either. So if anyone can arrange that, I'd be happy to give it a go. I
strongly suspect there'll be someone on this audience who can help with that. Adam, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for making the time. I know that you're really busy. And thanks to everyone for joining us today, and for all of those of you who provided questions in advance or contributed to the chat. And Dave, thanks as always for making it work, and for keeping it running in the background.
No worries. Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invite, and thanks for everything that you guys are doing. Because genuinely, I don't think what I've learned on both sides, it's not possible without having people championing it from all sides. So yeah, really appreciate that.
I know you'll have lots of people supporting you as you work going forward, and we'll be keeping an eye on the Birmingham Mail for the next of those articles. Take care, Adam. We'll let you get back to your kids.
Thanks everybody for coming. It's been really good. Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks, Paul. I think we pulled that off, didn't we? Okay. I'm going to end the meetings now, I think. I just want to make sure I've kept the recording, so I might just keep it running for a bit. But thank you all for coming. And thanks, Paul, for helping with the administration. Bye. All right, I'm going to end it now, so then I think we can save it.